Hello, my name is Stephen Fields, and I'm the Communications Coordinator with the Windsor Essex Catholic District School Board. And all this month, we are focusing our attention for Black History Month on some of the local community leaders who have come out of our schools, some WEC DSB alumni, people who are out there doing really important work to promote unity and equity within our own community. And today, we are joined by Jeremiah Bowers. Now, Jeremiah was a former student trustee with our board, and he has since gone on to do some really remarkable things. And he is currently working in the University of Windsor's president's office with a very specific role. So we'll get into talking about that very soon. But first of all, just by way of introduction, hello, Jeremiah, and thanks for being here with us.
Hello, no problem. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Terrific. So, so let's just get right to it. So, tell me just a little bit before we get into the, to the actual sort of meat of the questions and that kind of thing. Tell me just a little bit more about your background. So, I know you graduated from Holy Names High School. Where did you go to elementary school?
My elementary school experience was interesting. So I started off at WJ Langlois. Ended up going to Windsor Christian Fellowship Academy, and then went to First Lutheran Christian Academy.
Okay.
And from there, I went off into Holy Names.
Okay. And then you graduated from Holy Names in what year?
2016.
2016. And then I went on to University of Windsor, and if memory serves, you were majoring in political science, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And I understand that you were also, you worked your way up, you're president of the Student Alliance there.
Yeah. I ran in 2017, and then I finished in April 2020.
Okay.
April 2020. It was a long tenure.
Okay. And in that role, I mean, obviously, as president of the Student Alliance, you're dealing with all kinds of different types of advocacy types of issues. I mean, did you have the opportunity during your time as president to sort of push the diversity envelope to any kind of degree?
Yeah. My thinking when I went into student leadership was that there's not a lot of people who look like me in these spaces. And so for me, I always wanted to break that barrier or that form of gatekeeping that so often happens within the student movement, that this space is as much yours to claim as it is anyone else's, right? So I don't want to be an anomaly. There's been 90 presidents of our student union at the University of Windsor over these past years, and only 5 have been Black. Right. And so that was striking when I found out. And so for me, I kind of wanted to make a personal mission to see myself create that space for others to come in and run for student leadership, or just feel empowered to do whatever they can within their own faculty or their own department to make a difference. And while we were doing that, we were advocating to the university on a wide array of issues. So you kind of as you learn more and more about diversity, inclusion, equity, you realize it's not a singular issue, right? When we talk about equity, we're talking about education and access to education, breaking down those barriers to education as well. We're talking about OSAP and who has access to OSAP, right? And when the government is making cuts to OSAP, who is being most affected by OSAP? So those types of fights, cuts to education, talking about protecting our safe spaces from being defunded on campus and essential services from being defunded on campus. Those are the kind of fights that we had during my time in the student movement. And in some cases, those fights continue on today.
So you've found yourself a position in the president's office with the University of Windsor. Tell us a little bit, what's your title, and tell us a little bit about the job description and what your role is there, what you're going to be doing.
All right, so I'm the Anti-Black Racism Initiatives Projects Coordinator. So a very long title, but essentially I work alongside my colleague, Miriam Tolson-Murdy, who's the Strategic Planning Officer. And so we work together to support institutional-wide change as it relates to anti-Black racism specifically. So that can manifest in a variety of forms. It can be supporting student groups who are trying to change their own culture among student communities. It can be supporting departments, faculties, and creating change within their own spaces. But predominantly, the work is occupied by pushing for change at the administrative level, at the kind of essentially from the top, and taking feedback from the student community as well as staff and faculty, and trying to drive that change forward however we can. We recognize that it is very unusual for there to be 2 Black hires in senior administration. And so we've taken on that stance that we need, that at the end of the day, we're serving our community, and we want to ensure that this campus is safer for racialized folks. And so we're doing what we can within our means to push the envelope on that.
And what's your sense of the feel on campus now in terms of the willingness to go to those places where they need to make those kinds of changes? Do you feel that progress is being made?
I think progress is slow, as it is in any bureaucratic institution like the university. However, I think progress is being made, and I think right now there's a lot of people who are just waiting, right? And they're becoming impatient because this is also a lot of built up anger and anxiety and grievances, right? And so, I have acknowledged that coming to this role that, there is no grace, right? And people are going to want things done now because, frankly, folks deserve to have things done now, right? Black students deserve to feel safe on campus now. Black staff and faculty deserve to get their due recognition right now. So I think the campus is moving in a good direction. If there's any time for that change to happen, it is now. And there are also several students on the ground, activists who are pushing for change. And so I find when the university is being held accountable by those on the ground pushing for that change, and then there's people on the other side willing to also realize that change and to try to also push for that change, then we'll see that change sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. So of course we're talking about Black History Month. To you, why does this matter? Why is it important to have something like Black History Month, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so I always like getting these questions because I kind of flip it around. So for me, Black history is definitely more than a month, and I find that oftentimes, and this is also like when I'm asked the most to do things a lot of times, right? Black History Month, right? And I think it is a time to, of course, reflect on the history of Black folks, but I also think it's important to recognize that Black history is not just limited to a month, right? And it should not just be seen as a segment of a year, right? As Black history is history in general, and that in itself is something that's critical. And yeah, we have a special month for the remembrance and celebration of it, but that history can never be contained to a month, right? And I see that history needs to be integrated into our curriculums throughout grade school, high school, university. That celebration of excellence, that fight for liberation is something that's ongoing. So history is living, it's breathable, it's happening today. And I often think of like one Black leader who's inspiring to me is Dr. Angela Davis, right? And oftentimes when people speak about Angela Davis, it's like her in the past tense, right? When she's very much alive, right? So even so I think it's also a matter of folks realizing that like history, those who fought for our freedom back then, in some cases are still alive today, and there are still people today who are fighting for our freedom because we are not free. So Black History Month to me is important for that reason, because I think it's a time to then reflect on how Black history isn't just a month, but it does allow us all to center Black voices, Black culture, Black histories, and take that time to really see how Black history has impacted so much of what we have today.
So as a student, coming up through our system, and even as a University of Windsor student, did you have any specific Black role models that were close to you, people who sort of inspired you or influenced you, or was there sort of an absence of that in your life as a young man, or as a boy?
Yeah, so as a student, my personal role model would have probably been my grandmother. So she's a pastor, so she's always been the one that I've leaned on the most, and has told me, hold on to my faith, keep pushing, and I feel like my values and faith, and also frankly certain values of faith that I learned through through high school were the things that have kept me going even till this day, through all my roles, through all the different struggles I faced as a student in post-secondary education. Aside from her, however, I can't say I ever did have a role model in high school. I never had a Black teacher. Now being in university, there's several Black educators. I've never personally had one, but several Black educators who I look up to, who I relate to, who have inspired me to just keep going and who've encouraged me in their own ways. I find also in high school, you're really in your own little bubble. So you're thinking about here and now, and you're not really thinking about your future as much. And so what I think would have allowed me to have more role models, or would have allowed me to perhaps see myself differently, and have a model of like leadership to look up to, would have been if I had seen more, Black professionals come into the school. More, so I want to go into law. So like more Black lawyers coming in to say like, you can do it too, right? That's what I would have liked to see. More people who look like me coming into the school and sharing their experiences with me, so I can see that pathway is available to me, and that in itself is it's a that's a role model to me, right? And someone that I can look up to and then work towards being like. So yeah, I found a lot of my role models when I got to university instead, through some peers who have inspired me, through a lot of Black alumni, and definitely through a lot of student leaders I've met from other universities.
Mm-hmm. And what about on a grander scale, and some of those? I'm thinking of some of those civil rights leaders and people that might have inspired you as well, either as a young man or as an adult. And I think a lot of people, when asked this question, maybe they look to the South and they go to, some of the obvious ones like perhaps Dr. King or John Lewis or people like that. You mentioned Angela. Are there any others that you can think of? Perhaps maybe even some Canadian ones that sort of inspired you?
Yeah, definitely Viola Desmond, and she's someone who is often very overlooked. And I suppose you could equate her to like our own Rosa Parks, but I wouldn't want to compare to invalidate her own achievements in her own right. But I think she is such a forgotten figure in her own history, where people are so quick to know about, for example, Rosa Parks, but not many know about Viola Desmond and what she's done. So her for certain, kind of like an unsung hero in a sense in many ways, and I definitely look up to her. And and then there's also, I personally, several local leaders, Black leaders that I've looked up to over these years, and who inspired me personally, either through their own actions in the community, or through my own interactions with them.
Great. How do you feel, Jeremiah, about the current state of race relations? And you can speak about that, both. I mean, obviously you're dealing with this on the campus of the university, but within our community, and more on a national and perhaps even continental kind of level. I mean, obviously we look south again to the United States, to everything that's happened over the last year with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and all of those other kinds of things, and some of the conflicts that have arisen. How do you feel generally about that overall situation? What is there anything about it that, I mean, obviously there's probably some things that trouble you about it, but are there the things that cause you to be hopeful about the way things are going?
It's a good question. I think what troubles me is how deeply seated systemic racism is, in our society, and institutions that are meant to be these like bastions of like learning and discovery and self-discovery. And you come to university and you learn, you think you're gonna learn about just your major and learn more about yourself, and then you're gonna leave and then just go into go into whatever career that you want to go to afterwards. But lately especially, I've realized that systemic racism runs very deep, and through long-standing academic policies, whether at the school board level or at the university level. I think of all those policies that disproportionately impact Black, Indigenous students, other students of color. Um, I think of streaming. So I've had an experience when back in high school when I was meeting with a guidance counselor, and basically I wasn't doing too well in a class, but I knew if I was pushed, I could do better. And the immediate solution was maybe you should just take applied, right? And if I had taken applied for that specific course, I wouldn't have been able to go into university. So, and while the government has now, abolished, I guess, that practice in theory, um, quite often it's our own guidance counselors, where notably, very few, if any, are Black. I never had a Black guidance counselor to relate that I could relate to. It's those folks who are then encouraging us to not set our sights so high, right? To maybe try something else, to reevaluate, right? There's been countless times when I was like, I want to, I want to pursue this specific career path, and like people just laughed and said, good luck, right? And so,
Mm.
and that is a form of systemic racism, where people feel like Black students just can't make it, can't do it, right? They don't deserve to pursue those endless paths for themselves, and to just achieve their highest potential. Um, and just shut out their chances at a future. So that was just one thing that I noticed even in high school. Or even like I've never had a Black teacher from grade school through high school all the way into university. I've never ever had a Black educator whatsoever, right? And then to me, that just speaks to the hiring practices of school boards, right? And how deeply ingrained it is that, like, when we're hiring folks, like, what are we looking for, right? Are we looking at the fact that that the makeup of our schools is so diverse, and that those students, for them to survive in some cases and to feel safe and to prosper, they need to see other educators who look like them. Then those educators also need to be supported and not feel like their works are being marginalized and they're suffering under this system, right? And that happens across the entire education sector. So, and that is also why we don't see many Black folks in senior academic leadership, right, or as department heads. Um, Again, same thing in the school board. To me, happens at the university level. So there's patterns here that all correlate to saying that, you know, that that you that in a sense you don't matter, right? And that we are creating a culture here that isn't conducive to your unique experiences, but is conducive to, for lack of a better term, the majority's experiences. So that's where like representation matters, right? Our academic policies, what we do about that, matters, and that the fact that's so pervasive today, that's what troubles me. The fact that my skin color can be perceived as a threat to others, even my own peers, that is what troubles me. That's what scares me, right? That students can walk this campus, students, staff, and faculty that are Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color, that can walk this campus and receive threats, threatening emails, and that you just never know who's alongside you in your own classroom, who might have violent intents towards you. And this is just something that the university has had to grapple with the fraternity situation just a few months ago,
Mm.
right? And now there's this culture where student, staff, and faculty who are Black don't feel safe on campus, right? Don't feel safe even from their own homes, right? Because we fear that there's folks out there who have military training who are going to weaponize their violence, or are going to weaponize their racism, right? And these are things that, like, when we talk about Black history, especially going into Black History Month, we often talk about slavery and racism like in a past tense, right? Not realizing that racism is alive and well right here locally in Windsor, Essex, right here in Canada, right? It is not just an American issue. In fact, it's not just a North American issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing incidents of anti-Black racism sweep across the globe, right? And oftentimes we westernize a lot of things.
Sure.
So So yeah, so racism is definitely alive and pervasive, and that is what troubles me most. Now, what makes me hopeful is that I think is the upcoming generation. I've seen since all these incidents and patterns that have happened at the university in the past few months. I've seen high school students mobilize together and try to demand change from their own kind of like from their own means, doing what they can to create that change, right? And that is a type of courage that I wish I had back in high school, right? To be woke, for lack of a better word, back then, and to know then what I know now. And like these kids are coming up and having that knowledge, and they're wanting to tear down a system and rebuild anew and create a culture where everyone feels welcome and that they belong. So I'm hopeful for the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. So, just what we talked about, what gives you hope, but and this obviously there's no easy fix to this. But what do you think that needs to be done? You spoke about the younger generation and changing attitudes, and I think that's probably going to be part of your answer. But what in order to bridge the gap between people, I mean, how do you go about fixing that? That's such a difficult thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's there's no easy answer to that, and there's no one answer to that. I think it takes, and it depends on the context, but I definitely think it takes a long time to create change because it takes a long time to change people. All right, and it takes a long time to change cultures because people form those cultures, and people come in with their preconceived biases and their prejudices um, and just their prejudgment of others. And I think it's that continues to perpetuate racism, anti-Black racism in specific. But I think something easy to do is to consult um, the Black community, right? If we're talking specifically with the education sector, consult Black educators, consult Black families, see what the needs are, and see how you can create change systemically or institutionally based on that feedback, right? Um, and don't rely on Black folks to educate non-Black folks either, right? I think that's key. Do take the time to do that work yourself, to engage in that journey of self-learning and become an intentional anti-racist practitioner. Um, how are you disrupting racism within your own circles of friends, within your own circles of colleagues, right? In your workplace. All that matters. All that contributes to changing the culture. Um, so that's a I could go into a lot more detail, but basically that's a succinct answer I will give you. That I think as a start, it begins with with that personal journey of learning, and then it has to do with you taking on that role of being an anti-racist practitioner.
Mm-hmm. So Jeremiah, you talked a lot about your own experience coming up as a student through our system, and you talked about your current role, in the university, what you're doing with the president's office. I can tell you that one of the things that our board has recently done is we've partnered with an organization called Family Fuse, which you may have heard of, that is responsible for helping Black students navigate their way through the education system. But what do you think as an education community, whether that's at the elementary secondary level, I should say, or at the post-secondary level, as an education community, what do we need to be doing better to promote that greater sense of unity and diversity, and just providing Black students with that sense that they can achieve, that they can succeed, with the inspiration that they need to move on.
Right. Well, I think Family Fuse is like a fantastic organization to be working with, first of all. So I think working with and partnering more with Black community organizations is absolutely crucial for the education community to start to change its culture within the system, the classroom specifically. taking that direct feedback from the community, from Black families, from students, staff, and faculty, and okay, what is how can we support creating a safer culture for students, a safer experience, an experience where it's equitable and everyone's starting off at the same foundation, and everyone has a fair shot for the greatest possible opportunities. And I think that's always has to do with you have to see those barriers. You have to talk to the people who are affected by those barriers, right? Not rely on those folks to educate, but rather rely on those folks to give direction. Because at the end of the day, only the Black community can decide what it needs for itself. So I think working hand in hand with the community is absolutely crucial to that work. I think second would be within the classroom, being conscious of othering Black students specifically. So for example, you often hear about, oh, did you change your hair today? Or like, can I feel your hair? Like I've gotten that even in university, right? Like you always change your hair. Yeah. Well, it's my natural hair. So obviously like I want to do stuff with it, right? And it's like these kind of, these microaggressions that often surface quite often within the classroom that then contributes to isolating Black students. And the more you isolate through like just comments like that, the more Black students then feel out of touch with their education. And that's when you might see folks like even act out, for example, because there's no one that they can relate to. And then they feel like in a system that's already built against them, they feel like there's now even their teachers against them, even their peers are against them, right? And so I think that is key, working to eliminate microaggressions within the classroom from peers, from teachers, not limiting Black history to just Black History Month and integrating it into the entire curriculum through math, like for example, Hidden Figures. How does Hidden Figures apply to math? Through arts, through gym classes, through athletics programs. So let's start taking a comprehensive, wholesome view towards Black history and Black excellence, and how can we integrate it into our daily and everyday teachings about who we are as a society, right? And how we fit within that society. Next would be, I'd say, would be to prioritize, celebrate, centralize Black talent within the system. I think Black teacher, staff, and students, their works and excellence go unnoticed. It's often marginalized. And I think putting that back at the center and acknowledging that that their works matter, that their talents matter just as anyone else, and giving them the due recognition is also key, right? And so I think as we look forward, we also have to look to our past and see what have we done in our processes and procedures that have marginalized folks, that has continued to oppress folks, that has continued to othered even our own Black educators in the system, right? And what can we do to empower those folks to be to pursue, well, not to be, but to pursue their endless potential, endless pathways. I think that's what it comes down to. And the educational community taking on that intentional commitment to practice inclusion, right? Not just spouting that, EDI, because that's just the famous buzzwords these days, but being intentional with being an anti-racist practitioner, to echo what I said earlier. And I think the more we can do to the more that the educational community can do to be open to that change, and to not just be open, but to drive that change in consultation with the Black community, then that's when we'll start to see a systematic change.
Terrific, very thoughtful answer, Jeremiah. Thanks again so much for being here today. We've watched you come up as a student trustee and move on to your position with the university, and we can say that you're just a wonderful ambassador, I should say, for the WEC DSB. We're all very proud of the work that you're doing. So you're doing a great job, and keep it up. And thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.